Now, in a speech to the Conservative Party's spring conference yesterday, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had this to say.
Now is the time to end the culture of self-doubt, the constant self-questioning and introspection, the ludicrous debates about languages, statues and pronouns. Our history, warts and all, is what makes us what we are today.
I couldn't agree with the Foreign Secretary more. This, to me, folks, is no clearer than in our education system, right? These days, almost every responsibility that you would have perhaps reasonably assumed was that of the parent is now expected of the state. Most parents today, right, seem to believe it's the role of the state to teach their children to read and write, not their own. According to polling by the Royal Foundation set up by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, that's Will and Kate to me and you, I'm afraid I've to disagree fundamentally on any parent that thinks that. I think if we accept, though, that this is the reality, this is where we are, perhaps it's understandable that schools have moved beyond teaching our kids just about reading and writing and instead, I think, focus too much on whackery and wokery. We saw, didn't we, the painful reality of what it means to close our schools in today's society. Kids are just left without anything. Kids have been harder hit than anybody else, as well as taking little Martha or Arthur to the opticians instead of your parent. Little Martha or Arthur is now taught a dose of left-wing ideology for good measure too, folks. London Mayor Sadiq Khan launched a campaign last week to give children lessons on misogyny in primary schools. Kids as young as the age of 4, saying we've got to start in primary schools in relation to relationship education for boys. The Have a Word campaign is to tackle violence against women, which we can all get behind. But really, is this the way to go about it? I don't know about you, but I didn't learn about misogyny at school, and I don't hate women, right? I certainly don't think it's all right to be violent towards women. How patronising, how utterly condescending, how indicative of a society that's moving against men in such a shameless fashion. This is just another attempt to me to inject wokeness into the classroom. How about Sadiq Khan focuses instead on the plague of knife crime on his streets instead of this nonsense in classrooms? We saw Tory MP Miriam Cates in a question to the Schools Minister just last week, raising really important questions on adults pushing agendas and ideology in schools, something the government has said it's keen to stamp out. Only it hasn't done in the area of gender ideology, in which we have kids being taught about things like there are more than two sexes, that sex isn't binary, that if you feel as though you don't conform to gender stereotypes, you might be experiencing gender dysphoria, be transgender, and therefore identify as the opposite sex. All, in my opinion, pretty out there for kids to be hearing in the classroom. But it gets worse than that. Miriam raised some worrying anecdotes about schools that are transitioning pupils against their parents' wishes, and worse than that, frankly, without their parents' knowledge, convincing these kids that the solution to their problems is through this gender ideology, when actually these kids could be gay, they could be autistic, they could be vulnerable children, there could be a plethora of reasons, a whole list of things other than experiencing gender dysphoria. In my day, right, it used to be called growing up. It used to be called adolescence. It used to be called puberty. All of these things in which you find out who you are, what the world's about, and growing up, being an adult. Kids ought to be able to do that, as they have throughout history, throughout the history of the human race, right? Where we've done it naturally and organically, without the pushing of ideology by adults onto them. Kids need to learn about maths and English, not about how Arthur could be Martha and how Martha's right to use the school changing room without Arthur being in there is somehow transphobic, or how Arthur is going to grow up and beat and oppress Martha. It's just so wrong. But this stuff is everywhere. And if a Conservative Party with such a massive majority can't stamp it out, then who can? Ultimately, nice words by Liz Truss that were heard at the start there, but isn't it time, folks, for some action?
you.